I'm really curious to hear how it went, what your journey was. Is this the first book you've written?
It is.
It
I'm
is.
not sure if it was Andy's first book. I know Andy's actually written a couple of other books, but
Okay.
yeah, first
Okay.
one for me and the first one for Andy and I is a collaboration too.
Yeah. Well, that's great. It's interesting because Deborah's talked about the books, many books she's written, and and thought I've thought about the myself and maybe some of my team. We've actually considered putting a collaborative book together, but I can't seem to like wrap my mind around sitting down and doing it. That just it just seemed daunting to me.
Um, it's funny, I got some really good advice from a guy named Joseph Paris, who's a big
Hmm.
OpEx guy. And one of the things he said to me is, he said, if you think you want to write a book, think about, what the chapters would look like, and then try to sit down and write a 2,000 word article about several of the chapter topics. He's like, just publish it on LinkedIn, which is one of the things I did. But his thing was, if you can't write 8 2,000 word articles, you have no hope of writing a 50,000 word book.
Yeah.
And one of the things I found is, as I did that, I liked writing. Um, so, that really kind of helped me get enthusiastic about the process. But I will say, and one of the things Andy and I found out is that writing the book is, in some ways, that's the easiest part. Publishing
Okay.
is the the other piece. And
Sure.
and for me, that was much more sort of a strain, than
Uh-huh.
than the writing. But if you're ever interested, I'd be happy to talk to you about it, and also talk to you about some of the kind of publishing stuff we went through.
That sounds really interesting. I love the idea of the multiple articles, the 2000 word article concept. When you posted it on LinkedIn, I imagine that you got some good feedback from people. And I imagine that it actually may have influenced the editing, would be my guess, but I don't know. I'm curious about that.
Actually, it's funny. I did not get nearly as much feedback as the as you might think. I had a lot of people look at it, um, but not that many people commented on it, which I
Huh.
was kind of surprised, because I thought, well, I'll get, some nice comments, but I thought, well, I'll get some haters too, right? I mean,
Sure.
people were like, Chuck, you're full of crap. I didn't, but I
Right.
also didn't get that many comments overall either. But the fact that people looked
Maybe
at
you
it,
weren't provocative enough.
well,
Maybe you weren't edgy.
maybe so. Maybe that was the problem.
Yeah, you got to be a
Yeah.
little edgier to get the comments, I suppose. Maybe. Huh. That's wild. I like that idea. I think that could be a good approach.
It
That's really good advice.
it was, like I said, for me at least, that was some really great advice. And Joseph also has a book called The State of Readiness, which is a big,
Hmm?
is an OpEx kind of interesting book. But I figured, he wrote a book, he got it published. This seems like pretty good advice. I'll try it. And, if I'd given up after, 3 or 4 of those, yeah, I mean, our book is fairly short. It's really only about 40,000 words. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Now we have a lot of, like, we have like 100 pages of book and about another 90 pages of appendices. So, and I'm not
Oh,
counting
okay.
those in that 40,000 words, but um, I could, it was hard to write 40,000 words. A typical book is 50,000 words. So, but yeah, to me, if you can't knock out 8 or 10,000 words in, 7 or 8 articles, you're not going to make it.
Yeah.
You're never going to get there. And if you do it and like it, then you've already got, 8,000 or 10,000 words of your 50,000 done. You're 25% or 20% of the way there.
Sure. Okay. Well, that sounds great. I'm curious, and is Andy joining us? Do
Yeah,
you
he
know?
should be um, in the audience. Let's
He's
see.
not. He's not on yet, but that's okay. Well, I have some questions for you. I could keep asking. Um, I'm curious about. So you've written a book, and now what? I guess. Now what's the next step? What are you going? Are you trying to? What are you going to do with it? Are you going to market it? You're going to use it for consulting purposes? You're going to go on a book tour? I mean, like, what's your ambition next with it?
Sure. And the answer really is yes. I'm very proud of the book, and I think Andy is as well. But it doesn't do you any good to write a book if nobody reads it, right? Our purpose
Yeah,
was,
right.
to put information out there. So we've been marketing the book, doing social media posts. Um, I was at IISE a couple of weeks ago, talking to people and, hawking the book. So um,
Mm-hmm.
we're,
Mm-hmm.
things like this, which we really appreciate because it's a great opportunity to talk about the book. Probably try to
Mm-hmm.
present something at SHS in February. Maybe some other conferences where we can, create awareness around the book. Uh,
Yeah. Well, that
and
sounds great. I don't know if you're interested, but it's a smaller conference, but we have our Stanford, it's called the Stanford Lean Academic or Healthcare Academic Conference. Um, it's not just lean, it's really lean, Six Sigma, model for improvement, any kind of improvement science. It started 10 years ago as a specifically lean conference. So disregard the name necessarily that it's lean, but it's this improvement science conference. We have it every year, 10th annual this year. We're going to have it in September 10th, 11th, and 12th. If you're interested, I'll post the information to following this to the team, but it's at our website, smci.stanford.edu. But SMCI is Stanford Medicine Center for Improvement, .stanford.edu. And if you go there, you could see under events, there's the conference. That could be a good opportunity to present and even propose, potentially propose, I don't know, talking about your book, networking with people. Could be really
sure.
good. We don't have, it's not a conference where we have a, like, what am I trying to say, exhibit hall or anything like that, where we have people selling things, but it's small enough that it's a really good opportunity to network with
Yeah.
some really leading voices in improvement science. So if you're interested, that could be an
I'm
option
absolutely,
too.
yeah, I am absolutely interested. I would love to come and talk
Yeah,
about simulation and kind of
yeah,
the what versus the how concept that's in the book. Yeah, it'd be great.
that would be interesting. That would be really interesting. And I know Lisa's on the call here. She and I are both on the organizing committee of that conference, and so there could potentially be opportunity there too with as we can. I mean, we're still finalizing some of the details of
Sure.
the conference, but it will be at Stanford the 10th and 11th primarily. The 12th we have a kind of workshop, and that could be an option too if there's a workshopy kind of thing you're interested in. I don't know if we have all the slots full on that too, but possibly an option.
Oh
Um,
yeah, I would
if
love
you
any opportunity to talk about
Okay,
simulation in healthcare
good,
and stuff. Yeah.
great. Um, well, I don't know if you want to get started without Andy, but if you have prepared anything prepared, I'm recording this. So even if there's just, the 5 of us here, I'm recording it and I will send it out to the entire list that we have.
Okay.
Looks
Yeah.
like someone dropped off. So we've got now 4 of us, but that never dissuades me. I'm
Yeah.
like, let's keep going.
No.
And people do watch these, so it's an opportunity to be able to share. And if nothing else, I want to hear it. So this is great.
No, I was going to say that doesn't, 3 or 4 people doesn't dampen my enthusiasm. I was trying to think of, there's some live Jimmy Buffett record I have where he talks about playing in New Orleans, and he's like, I was getting ready to get up and give a concert. And there's one guy in the audience, and I'm like, hey, dude, let's just go get a few beers. So, but
Oh
3
man,
or 4, that's that's good.
good,
I
good.
do some slides. Can I
You can
figure out
share.
how to
Go ahead.
share here? Here, here, that. Can you see my screen?
No, not yet.
Okay.
Oh, it's coming up now.
Okay. All right, good. Now let's see if we can do this next part. Sometimes I'm technologically challenged. Apparently this is starting to look like one of those times. Oh, now
There
see
you are.
look. Perfect.
Yeah, we can see it. Perfect.
All right. So first again, I'm not sure if everybody was on, but again, thanks for the opportunity to do this. I'm going to be doing the presentation, but Andy, if he joins in, he's my co-author. He may jump in from time to time. So a little bit of background for Andy and myself. Andy is a Six Sigma Master Black Belt. He has over 50 years of healthcare experience in process improvement, resource management, and has worked with hospitals. He told me in over 40 states. So I'm not sure if I might have him beat there on the state part. I have to think about that a little bit. But Andy and my experience is similar in that we started a long time ago. This actually is year 50 for me. I did my first hospital project in 1975 as a co-op student at Roanoke Memorial Hospital, Roanoke, Virginia. And so I actually ended up working there when I got out of school. So I've worked for hospitals, hospital management companies, consulting companies, and like Andy and Deborah and Brad Schultz from last bit time did a stint with GE Healthcare as well. So before we jump into the book and some of the things that we bring out, I wanted to just talk for a minute about why we wrote the book. So Andy and I both worked at Universal Health Services together. And we spent a lot of time there deploying simulation, especially to our EDs, which is one of, honestly, my favorite areas to work in. But we designed a standard freestanding ED model for our design build team. We had at UHS, we had a large construction group, and we spent between 600 million and $1 billion a year in new construction. So, we built new EDs, new wings on hospitals. We built, greenfield hospitals, and a bunch of freestanding EDs. And we were able to use simulation to look at ED design, nursing units, ORs, both in terms of the build process, new facility process, but we spent a lot of time looking at especially our EDs because of the problems we all typically have in EDs, looking at process and patient flow. So that was one of the sort of big things that made us think when we stopped doing that, I was kind of semi-retired, and Andy, who had been semi-retired, went back. Andy really approached me 6 months or 8 months after I had kind of retired to say, we ought to write a book about simulation because it is nowhere near as prevalent in hospitals or healthcare organizations as it is in industry. and that's one of the things I probably lost sight of at UHS, because we use simulation, almost every day, certainly every week, we were looking at simulation for something. And so UHS has about 27 acute care hospitals. So, we were heavily involved in using it. And I guess it didn't occur to me that there were still a lot of organizations that really did not make use of simulation. But as Andy and I talked, we talked to some of our peers, we talked to at UHS, we used FlexSim as our simulation software. We talked to those guys about the idea of writing a book, and they were, also kind of saying, yeah, we need more information. We need more focus on healthcare. And when we look, the books that were out there really dealt with simulation software. It was about how to use the software, and typically it was written by the people in simulation companies. In fact, I've just got a book a couple of weeks ago called Any Logic in 3 Days. I haven't had a chance to read it, but I met the author at the conference, and I'm pretty sure it's going to focus on how to implement any logic in 3 days, which is important. But one of the things Andy and I realized from our experience is the what there's actually a sign behind my monitor that I can see out of the corner of my eye, and it says, we are focused on what to do, not how to do it. And in little type under that, it says, once you know what to do, the how will depend on the software. So Andy and I, we knew how to do simulation in terms of the what to do, but until we decided to buy FlexSim, we didn't know how to do simulation in FlexSim. We did I think I had done some med model stuff and a couple of really old pieces of software that aren't even around anymore. Andy, I think, had maybe done mid model or pro model. But what seemed to be missing in terms of information, and one of the things I think that helped us be successful at UHS was that idea of the framework, the what to do. Once you know what to do, the how to do is definitely going to depend on what software package you pick, or from a step back from that, are you going to do Monte Carlo simulation? Are you going to do discrete event simulation? What is that going to look like? And so in the book, we focus on discrete event simulation. That seems to be the most common tool used in healthcare, and it's one of the coolest too. Monte Carlo simulation certainly has a lot of applicability, but since this is a little more complicated in terms of its use, we decided to focus there. So healthcare is complex. I wanted to say it was complicated and complex. I'm not sure if that's 100% true, but there are many complex and adaptive functions within a hospital setting, right? EDs, ORs. Now, not everything is that way, right? The cafeteria, food service, central sterile supply, those actually function more like factories. And Brad talked last time about the idea of linear flow versus complex adaptive flows. And so because healthcare has so much of that complex adaptive systems, it's really the perfect place for simulation. And those systems are also terribly difficult to manage with simple math, right? Averages are not going to be a good way to figure out how to judge how many ED rooms you need or how many ORs you need. And if you work off the averages, you're pretty much going to be wrong on average. So, which is why sometimes people build new facilities or renovate facilities, and by the time they get done, they're already over capacity or already have capacity issues with their new, set of ORs. The other thing that simulation is especially good for, I always think about when I was sort of a new master black belt. I worked with a hospital in Texas teaching Lean Six Sigma, and one of the projects a couple of the black belts did is they started an ED process improvement. And what was significant, why this stuck with me, is they worked the process, they did everything pretty much right, had some changes, implemented the changes, did a good job of implementation, and that kind of got them about 20% of the way to where we needed to be. So, not discouraged, step back, worked the stuff again, more changes, implemented those changes, and 50% of the way there. So, fortunately, the third time was the charm. We got where we needed to be. But that was definitely a place where, had we had some simple simulation, I mean, at that point, we didn't really need a complicated model. A simple simulation model would have helped us, not have to do it 3 times. And these guys had good change management. The hospital was very excited about doing Lean Six Sigma, so we managed to get away without the ED staff, doing ugly things to me. But honestly, it was touch and go. If we'd had to go a 4th time, if I'd gotten sick in Texas, I could not go to that ED for sure. So, and that's one of the things we often, change is hard. Getting people to adopt a new system is hard. Making sure that we've got the right thing so that we can do it once and get where we need to be, that's worth some time and effort a lot of times in setting up a simulation model. So we tend to think of simulation a lot of times as new facility or renovation, but facility related stuff. But there's a lot of process stuff, even when we don't need the simulation to help us understand what's going on. A lot of times simulation is helpful in terms of looking at our solutions or our changes and making sure that the changes are going to get us where we need to be. And so at UHS, we actually did both of those things. Or really all 3 of those things. Facility stuff, sometimes we weren't sure what was going on. The simulation model helped us figure that out. And a lot of times it helped us figure out if the changes we were doing were going to give us the results we wanted. And so that's, and I think that typically in any situation, that's really what you're using simulation for. So our goal with the book, increase awareness around simulation. It's like I said, it's a head scratcher for me that now after all these years, simulation is still really a fraction of what in healthcare, a fraction of what it is in other industries. And I think part of that is people in other industries are more aware of simulation. I think executives in those businesses tend to be more aware of simulation than healthcare executives. The other thing is that a lot of process improvement professionals, especially in healthcare, I think have clung to the idea that simulation is very, very difficult and you could only use it on, ginormous projects. So part of what we wanted to do was really demystify the tool itself. With today's object-oriented programs, people like FlexSim and MedModel, AnyLogic, Arena, Simulate, really it's not nearly that difficult to use the simulation. The objects are, once you understand how to use the objects, they guide you through the process. So if you can get the framework right, the software kind of comes, I will say, fairly naturally. Okay. And it's not like we're writing code, I was talking to the AnyLogic guys at the conference, and they were really proud of how you could write code in their software, which one day I might, before I die, see a problem that I needed to write code for, but honestly, I doubt it. Certainly in all the projects we did at UHS, we never wrote a single line of code. We just used the software, used the objects, and arranged them in the right order. The idea of this is a practical guide. One of the things Andy and I came back to time and time again is, you don't have to understand how an internal combustion engine works in order to drive a car. You don't really need to understand all the intricacies of simulation software in order to utilize it to solve problems. And so we started off with that idea of the practical guide focused on the what and not necessarily on the how, which really makes it software agnostic. Our primary audience, healthcare process improvement professionals, kind of people who are on the call today. We also hope that maybe there were some simulation professionals out there without healthcare knowledge that we could help. And so if you read the book, you'll see we sometimes jog back and forth between that idea of you're a healthcare professional and we're helping you with the process of simulation versus explaining how healthcare works. You know, we at UHS, we did work a little bit through our design construction crew with some outside simulation software vendors. And that actually did not work particularly well. It was, not only was it expensive, they didn't really kind of understand healthcare. And I always go to the idea of, you know, they would assume that everybody who arrived by ambulance in an ED went to the trauma bay. But, you know, if you've spent much time in an ED, especially smaller hospital EDs, you know, 200, 300 beds in various communities, you know that not everybody who arrives by ambulance is an ESI level 1 or 2, or sometimes even a level 3. So, you know, you have to have a process for that, and you have to understand that process. And that's where a lot of times the people from the simulation consulting companies, I'm sure they did great at industries, various industries, but for healthcare, they just lacked that nuance to really kind of set up the model properly, which is where I think as healthcare professionals, we understand that part. We just need to get the simulation part. So let's jump into the structure of the book really quick. So start at the beginning, chapter 1. Everybody's heard the idea garbage in, garbage out, or Andy would say fuzzy problem in, fuzzy solution out. So one of the things we focus heavily on in chapter 1 is defining the problem. So I'm not sure where, like, everybody might have learned Lean Six Sigma, but one of the things I heard over and over again when I heard it, you know, a problem well defined is a problem half solved. So that tends to be true in simulation as well. And many times, and I'll maybe harp on this as we go through, people want to jump into building the model. They get all excited about the model and the cool stuff it will do. And they forget, oh, wait, you know, step 1, let's make sure we understand the problem. And if you don't really understand the problem, and I'm not sure how you, you know, first, do you need simulation, right? If you don't understand the problem, simulation may not be the right tool. And if it's the right tool, then, you know, do you need Monte Carlo simulation? Will that do? Will a simulation package like more steam engine room, which is a very simplistic, quick and dirty simulation, will that work for you? Or do you need, you know, 3D nurses and doctors moving around and CT scanners and all the fancy stuff you get with a healthcare model like FlexSim or MedModel? So, you know, step 1, define the problem. Step 2, you know, what are your data needs? Laying out the data, what you need, and especially the idea of statistical distributions. Sometimes when you learn a simulation package, in order to make it simple to teach, they just assume a bunch of stuff about distributions, arrival distributions, service distributions. But, you know, the model's only as good as those assumptions. And today, especially with EHRs, we don't really need to assume. I mean, we can grab a year's worth of ED arrivals by ESI level pretty quickly, or 5 years maybe. And that, to me, that's mind-blowing compared to, you know, 20 years ago, 25 years ago. But that we have that data, we can use that data to, you know, figure out our arrivals are gamma distributed or exponentially distributed or you know, chi-square distributed or whatever. But there are simple tools we can dump that data into and it'll spit out and say, hey, it's a gamma distribution. You know, we don't have to do a lot of, you know, math or, you know, messing around. And we don't have to guess or assume. We have the data now. So data needs, and then resources, software considerations, how to build the core team. Also in chapter 1, we talk about making a case for simulation. We actually walked through a little bit of what we had to do at UHS. Even though they were outsourcing simulation, it still took several years to pull the right levers so that we brought simulation in-house and started working with our design construction crew, but also using it ourselves. So all that's the basic chapter one. We hit a little bit of simulation history, but mostly it's about building a case, defining the problem, and figuring out what your needs are going to be. So chapter two is the model building, and that's really the heart of the book and the heart of the process. So in that, again, focused on that idea of what to do, not how to do it. We start with a structured process. So we lay out a clear process for using simulation as a tool within a project to solve a problem. And that's the other thing. Simulation is not a tool unto itself. It's a tool you deploy as part of a project. You're going to deploy other tools, process mapping, maybe fishbone diagrams. I have no idea what tools you might be deploying, but simulation fits within a project, and that's where a lot of people miss out. You need good project management. You need all the tools in terms of defining a team, creating an executive sponsor. All of those things are the framework that allows simulation to work effectively. And when we see people having problems, I can't think of a single instance where I've seen, and Andy, if Andy's, I see Andy's on, I'll get him to jump in. I've never seen a case where the problem was you didn't put the right information in the object, or you put a CT scanner where an MRI should have been. That's not the problem. The problem is we didn't get the right people on board. We didn't collect the right data. Those are where the problems come in. And frankly, those are also where the problems come in a lot of projects, right? So if this sounds familiar, it should, because that's where simulation goes wrong. Like I said, it's not the mechanics of the simulation software that typically goes wrong. It's all the things around it. So in building the model, we wanted to be software agnostic, right? We did not want to focus on how to build a FlexSim model, knowing that you might use FlexSim, you might use Arena, you might use MedModel, whatever. Again, what to do, the structure. And we laid out the various steps in a simple, 1, 2, 3, 4. Here's what you do first. Here's what you do second. We do talk about the model building in terms of software, right? Arrival, how do you plan for arrivals? How do you lay out the roadmap in terms of you have a registration function? How do you create a service distribution or a task? I use the term service distribution. I'm going to stick with that, but some people think of that as a task distribution, right? The time it takes to do a particular task, which might be normally distributed or exponentially distributed. Hopefully it doesn't have a standard deviation of 8 times its mean, or, I have other problems I need to address before I do simulation. So, and we've probably all been there. The last thing, couple of things we do, which I think are sort of 2 critical steps. The first of the last 2 is making sure that the model is trustworthy. And this is where a lot of people get twisted up. We call that verifying, validating, and accrediting. Verifying the model, making sure that the model works as you intended. I think most people do that. I've rarely seen a case where people didn't, though. Let me be clear, I have seen cases where they haven't done that. But validating the model, people tend to sometimes want to skip over that step, making sure that the model works in a known situation the way that actual situation unfolds. Really making sure that the model in a historical situation gives you the expected data. And finally, accrediting the model. And this is where I find people lose that trustworthy piece, and that is getting the people who are going to use the information, okay? Not use the data or not use the model, but use the information you're producing to actually change something, making sure that they're on board and that they have confidence that what the model is telling them makes sense, and is worth doing. So again, those steps aren't that difficult, but again, people tend to skip over the validating sometimes and the accrediting a lot. They don't spend enough time with the end users, helping them work through why the model is science and not, voodoo science or magic, and giving them that confidence that if the model says do it this way, that's a way we're going to try to do it. And finally, the last of those two critical steps, communicating your results. Again, lots of communication needs to go on, not just at the end, but all through the process in order for people to have confidence that the model is valid and that it's going to provide good information. So chapter 3, organizational change management, what we sometimes from our GE experience, what happened there? There we go. Sorry, my big old clumsy hands hit some buttons. So originally, this change management, which is now a chapter, was just a couple of pages. And as we talked to some of the folks at FlexSim about what we were doing, and we're laying out some of the chapters and our thoughts, one of the things that they said is really, from their point of view, change management was the missing piece. They talked about how often they had seen people build models, have these really nice models, very nice results, but when they said, okay, what happened when you implemented it? They got we didn't, Dr. Smith didn't like it, so we didn't implement it, or the nurse manager wasn't happy, or we decided to do something completely different from the model because that's what everybody thought would work. So, as we've talked to some of our peers and kind of heard that same thing. So this kind of grew to a whole chapter. Really, change management is woven throughout the structured process. We want to avoid trying to sell the model. We want people to buy in. And I was trying to think, I just heard, we used to say 62% of projects fail because of a lack of change management. The other day, I heard somebody quote a statistic like 70% fail. I don't know if those are exactly right, but in my experience, I've seen a lot of projects fail because of a lack of change management. And I think it's even more important. I mean, if people think Lean Six Sigma is some sort of weird, technique that you should be scared of, I guarantee you simulation will cause them to, hear voices and smash their head against the wall. Right? It's hard enough to get people to understand that, it's just basic science here. So you got to start change management long before you start building the model, right? So I may be preaching to the choir in this case, but that is a big part of where we see people going wrong, and thus why it takes up one of 4 chapters in the book. So Andy and I, from our GE experience, we always endorse the 2-track concept. One track is the technical track. That's where we're using process mapping and fishbone diagrams and all sorts of other things, simulation. And the other track is the change management track. That's where we're helping people work through the fact that we're going to make changes, and those changes are going to make people better off in the long run, or hopefully not the very long run. But that, like I said, that I think one of the reasons we were very successful at UHS was that change management piece, getting people involved, working with folks, helping them understand not just for simulation, but for every project, but especially for simulation, sort of demystifying it, helping them understand it was just one more tool, and getting them involved through the whole process, so that when we would actually show them the model, show them, okay, this is what's happening now. Look at your waiting room. Now let's look at the new processes or the new facility. Now let's look at what the waiting room is doing. They understood what they were looking at, and they understood, hey, those new processes, it looks like they're working. We need to try those in real life. Let's actually go do them. And that, The other thing I would say too, which is not change management, but communication, the cool 3D models where we see the patients coming in and going to the registration desk and sitting in a chair in the waiting room, and the somebody coming out and getting them and taking them and rooming them, and the physician. For the people on the staff, the nurse manager, the ED staff or the OR staff, the physicians, and the executives, that really brought the science to life. I mean, you could do, obviously, we used to do simulation. We didn't have any of that stuff. We just did numbers. That was much harder to sell. The 3D piece makes it much easier to sell when I can say, if you use this rule for when you start your fast track, these rooms, as you can see from the simulation, these rooms are going to be empty and your waiting room is going to be full. If you open these fast track rooms instead of at noon, if you open them at 8 o'clock in the morning, this is what your waiting room is going to look like. That's massive in terms of getting people's attention and helping them understand that this change brings this result. And I can see it on the screen. I can see if I, instead of opening at 8 o'clock, I open at 10 o'clock. This is what it's going to look like. And getting the staff involved to say, well, what if we did this? Make a few tweaks to the simulation and immediately show them, well, if you did X, you'll get Y. That is hopeful in terms of that change management piece, right? That's getting people engaged. But it also helps you in terms of the selling and the trustworthiness of the model when they see all of those things. So again, change management, I could talk, all day about change management because can
I ask you? Can I interrupt for a second? I just
Sure.
have a question. My interest is, of course, piqued due to simulation. That's an area we, at least within the improvement science group that we work with, we don't do a lot of that. And likewise, we don't use as much change management as I think we probably should. I'm curious, do you have a particular method that you like over another when it comes to change management?
Well, first I'll give you the consultant answer, right? It depends.
Sure.
Uh,
Yeah.
But in this chapter in the book, we use the GE CAP model. And we chose that particular model for this chapter because it is very tactically focused, right? GE came up with it to help do projects. And so simulation is part of a project. So I like that. I would have to admit I'm more of a tactical person than a strategic person in a lot of ways. I like that. I like the Cotter 8-step model also. It to me is fairly tactical. Mm-hmm. If you're doing more kind of organizational stuff, right? Not projects and change and process improvement or new facility design, but you're doing more organizational kind of change. The ADCAR model, the ProC, I'm not sure I never can figure out how they pronounce that.
ProSci, yeah.
Yeah, the ADCAR model. I like that model. Andy and I used in one of our projects where we did a whole big, 2-year organizational change project. We worked with somebody from Cerner, so we used the Cerner CLEAR model. And it's similar to ADCAR, and actually, it works pretty well. I wasn't super thrilled with it for that particular application, but they were using it when Andy and I got involved, so we went with it. And one of the things I would also say, and I think we say this in the book or in one of the blog posts I did, in some ways, it doesn't matter which model you use, as long as you use some sort of structured model.
Sure.
That's, step one is to have that structure around change management and, work the steps. I think some people gravitate more to the ADCAR because it's more strategic. It's kind of bigger. Like I said, I'm more tactical. I like CAP. I like the Cotter sort of 8-step model. I was trying to think. There's another model, an older model, freeze, unfreeze. I can't remember the name of that one, but anyway, like I said, I think those models, especially, there's tons of information out there on CAP. and there's tons of information out there on Cotter. So those are really well populated in terms of the how to. And those, like for my engineering brain, they're much like A, B, C, D. Now, obviously change management doesn't work. It's not linear, but I like having things laid out in linear steps to say, first I got to do this, and then second I do this, and then I might have to go back and do the first one over again or tweak it a little, but I like that arrangement. So, but
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. I'm gonna go back to that for just 1 second. One of the things in the book, shameless commercial coming, we do make reference to the Kinetic Resolution, which is my company, Andy and I work with, website, which does have a free change management model on the website. And there is other information. So one of the things you run into in a book is there are things you'd like to do, but it doesn't really fit the printed word very well or fit in the confines of the book. So there are places in the book where we reference the website where you can go and, like download free stuff. So I will just say that, and people are welcome to download that free stuff whether they buy the book or not. It's www.kineticresolution.com/ can't remember what word we're using. Just Kinetic Resolution. You'll see a menu at the top.
Maybe I could ask if Andy could put that in the chat for us, and then I'll have it, and I'll send that out with the notes for this.
Yeah, Andy, can you do that? Okay, I'm going to take that as acknowledgement that he can. And if not, I will get it to you pretty quickly. So chapter 1, 2, 3, now chapter 4. Here in this chapter, we've been through the model. We've talked about change management. Now we dive into how the models are used. And so we provide a number of examples in the categories you see on the screen. But I want to be clear that those examples are through references. There are no really involved case studies in the book. What we do is we've done a bunch of research. We point you to the existing, here's how we used simulation in an ED. Here's how we used it in a registration function. And there are a surprising number of specific topics about how simulation is used. Not nearly as many as I would like for there to be, but there are a fairly large number. And in the appendices of the book, I was saying earlier to Ryan, I'm not sure everybody was on, but so the book is about half words, the 4 chapters, and the other half of the book is appendices, which gives charts about examples of how simulation is used, or we have a whole appendices on organizational change management where we discuss in more detail the ADKAR model, the Cotter model, and we run through various models that we don't talk about in chapter 3 where we focus on the CAP model. The other thing we do in chapter 4 is we talk about emerging technologies. So AI, ML, LLM, other MOUSE kind of stuff. Lots of acronyms. And after going to a conference and seeing a bunch of this stuff, I'm still scratching my head about some of it. But it's really just starting to get into simulation. And I think in the long run, it will make simulation even easier to use, especially some things around machine learning and AI. For today, I think there may be some organizations that have incorporated that. I haven't seen that much of it in what I've seen, but I believe that will be the next step. Certainly, take something like digital twins, which is fairly new, but really a few years ago, digital twins was a new concept, and today it's sort of old hat. So, we do talk about all of that stuff in chapter 4, where we give brief explanations of how those things may impact simulation in the future. Whoop, hit the right button. Okay, so practical roadmap. We built these models. We've gone through a bunch of this. Sort of this is our take in terms of trying to make it practical and make it easy to use. I think we've hit that sweet spot fairly well. I believe you can pick up this book and follow along pretty quickly and have the right framework for your simulation model. Whether you use FlexSim or MedModel or Arena or whatever, I think no matter what software you use, this framework will help you be successful. Okay, another shameless commercial. I don't feel at all bad about this. So we do, as of last week, we have this available in ebook format. And so I'm not sure if people are big Amazon users, but it is available in Kindle Unlimited, which I personally use Kindle Unlimited a lot. So, if you want to, if you're a Kindle Unlimited user, you can, borrow the book, look through it. And if you decide you like it, then you can buy an ebook or buy the paperback book. And if you don't like it, pitch it back. So some quick FAQs that often come up. Do I need to be a programmer or a statistician? Nope. Do you need to know statistics? Yes. Not programming. I was trying to think today when I was looking at this. I'm not sure I could write a line of code except maybe for some basic code, and I'm not even sure I could manage that today. I certainly couldn't do Python or some of those packages, but fortunately, like I said, you don't need it. In all our years of using it at UHS, we never wrote any code. So there are a lot of packages out there. I've named a bunch of them. Do we recommend one? No, because the package you decide to use is going to depend on your situation. If you need 3D modeling, there are a bunch of them that do 3D modeling. If you decide you don't need 3D modeling, there are some fairly simple low-cost packages that you can use to do simulation. So again, you have to figure out what you need. We do cover in the book, if you are going out as an RFP for figuring out some software, we do give you a bunch of questions and things that you can ask or that you need to figure out in order to make a good decision. Now, how do I convince my organization? That's the toughest question. At UHS, I realized we needed simulation about 5 years before I actually managed to get it. So obviously, it may not be that easy, but we do, again, talk about how to make the case. And I would say that if you read my story in there about how we did it at UHS, it might offer also some insight into how you bring about simulation as a tool. And, can I really use the book to improve patient flow in an ED? Absolutely. We did it in, 30 or so EDs. It definitely works. And I will say that one of the people who caused me to realize that I wasn't spending enough energy or thought about simulation is Brad Schultz. I'm sorry Brad's not on the phone, because I probably never told him that. But when we were at GE, one of the things that struck me was Brad was very he had integrated simulation into his toolkit in a very smart way. There we had access to Monte Carlo simulation, so a little different than discrete event, but Brad was really good at using simulation as one of his tools. And honestly, it made me really think, hey, I'm missing out on a good tool here, which sort of helped me kind of reawaken and also demystify simulation for me as well. So, what if my data isn't perfect? If you think your data is perfect, you're probably having a dream, because I've never seen that, not just in healthcare, but in any organization. I will say, I think I mentioned this before, today with EHRs and EMRs, we have so much really cool information almost at our fingertips. If your IT department is, a good partner, compared to the old days where, when I would try to do simulation, many years ago, there was an OR system or an ED system, there was a registration system, there's a radiology system, there was a lab information system, and I was trying to get all this information and match it all up, and really it was like a database nightmare. And I am not a particularly good programmer or database manager, so today you can just dump that stuff out, manipulate it, and if you understand what the data is, and we talk about that in the book, how to do that. But if you understand that just because a title says something, that doesn't mean that that's what that data element is. There's a lot of data, and you can make good use of it. There may be gaps, but you can work around that fairly easily in your simulation. So, other questions, comments, concerns? Chuck, you're full of crap. I don't believe in simulation.
I think it's fascinating. So Chuck, first time I really got to see this in action, I mean, I saw some of it years ago here and there, but I went to an event where some students from San Jose State Industrial Engineering, they presented on some of the work that they were doing with simulation, and it blew my mind, honestly. It really did. And I walked away thinking, there's no way I could do that. That's so over my head. And it seems like you've presented this in a way that is at least approachable, where I feel like I might even be able to do it, so I don't know, but I mean, don't know that to be true, but I feel like
absolutely, you absolutely could do it. I was smiling because Andy and I used to work with a San Jose State professor, Lou Freund, who taught simulation, and I was trying to think, at one of the HSPIC conferences, his group won the simulation competition, which we were very proud of. Mecon guy like Andy and I, but a lot of times when the students present, they are hyping the modeling part, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I get it. That one of the things that actually my son and I talked about, he's a chief technology officer. We were talking about voice of the customer, voice of the business, et cetera. And he called it the voice of ego. When you get in, when you're a gearhead, right, and you get involved with some cool technical thing, you tend to fall into that and get really excited, and kind of hype it up. And you forget to, in a lot of cases, it's about the structure, it's about the process. But really, FlexSim, for example, I'll pick on FlexSim because I've had to learn FlexSim like 3 times now. Because I will say that simulation is a perishable skill, right? Using a particular package, if you don't use it for 3 or 4 years, you go back to it. But heck, I just went back and downloaded their model and looked at their little examples, and boom, I was building simulation models again. And most of the companies have free models. You can download, I know FlexSim, AnyLogic, I think Arena does, I think MedModel does. But yeah, you can go out and download it, and typically they have some sort of example you can work through, and you get a pretty good feel. But we had some techie types at UHS do it, but I had nurses and other people who did not have technical backgrounds go out to Utah to FlexSim, take a 2-day course, and come back, and they could build models. Now, like I said, the danger in that is you got to understand arrival distributions and service distributions and the framework beyond building the model. But they could. I think almost anybody who has a sort of PI mindset could learn to build a model in a couple of days.
Fascinating. That's really neat. Likewise, I think it's interesting. You said you couldn't code in Python or things like that, but I would argue that now with some of these AI tools we have, you could. And some of our team, we do. We build in Jupyter Notebook, Python, and it's actually much more approachable and available than it used to be. So, I mean, you could even do some of that too. Anyway, that's a bit of an aside, but I would not say no to that you couldn't, because I bet you could.
Well, and that's a perfect example of how the supporting technology makes the actual thing like Python easier to do. And what I would say is that today, simulation, the use of objects in simulation, where you say this is a CT scanner and it says, what's the arrival distribution to it? How long does it take? And, it feeds you through. That makes that stuff easy. I don't know about Andy, but my first simulation model was like 1976, and it was written in Fortran. And let me tell you, it takes a lot of punch cards to do a simulation program.
Yeah.
So, today.
Talk about blowing my mind. I think that would blow my mind. I think just even thinking about that is very complicated.
I think if you look into it, or any of the folks on the call look into it, one of the things they'll find is with those objects, they have really made it easy to figure out how to do things. You can slap a CT scanner down in your emergency room, go through the setup in terms of all the little questions it needs answered, and boom, it starts working. Patients come up, and they get in there, they go through, they come out, go back. But yeah, it's pretty amazing, I think.
So interesting. I'll see if anyone. Let's see. Looks like Lisa. Okay, she just said. Lisa Freeman is here. She's one of our administrator of the Stanford Medicine Center for Improvement. So she just gave her contact information in the chat, and so you have that information if you'd like. I know we've got a couple of others on the call. Anyone have any questions for Chuck and Andy? Okay, stunned silence. I think that was very comprehensive. I'm fascinated both with the process by which you wrote the book, as well as the book content itself. I went to the QR code, already pulled it up on Amazon, so I plan on getting it and checking it out. Right. Like I said before, if you'd like, I put in the chat I'll put it again, our website for SMCI, or the Stanford Medicine Center for Improvement. On there, you can go check out our conference that's coming up on September 10th and 11th. And right. If you want, go ahead and send me an email if you're interested in coming, and I'll see if there may even be a spot to speak on simulation, or if nothing else, just come and network with people.
Wow. I would definitely be interested in coming. But yeah, if you have an opportunity to talk about simulation or organizational change management, I would love to come and talk about those things.
Excellent. That's so great. Excellent. Well, I know I know this goes up to the hour, but I don't want to keep you unless there's things that you all want to discuss. So I'm going to open it up one more time, and if there isn't, we'll go ahead and close the call. Okay, well, I'll take that as we're good. So thank you so much, Chuck. Thank you, Andy, for writing the book. I know you were on mute, but we appreciate the content, your participation in this group, and I will share this recording widely with the team, with the whole distribution, and I do know that they do watch it. So, and feel free to share it with whomever too, because it's going to be on our I'm going to put it on our YouTube channel, so you can
Excellent.
check it out that way too. So
Yeah.
wonderful. Thank you again, Chuck. Thank you,
Thank you.
Andy. I really appreciate your time. Okay, well, I hope you all have a wonderful weekend, and we'll talk next time. Okay, take care.
Thanks.
Bye bye.